Live from the chicken wing capital of the world, Buffalo, New York. You're listening to the Childcare Bridge Podcast, your source for the best tips, tools, and tactics on how to market and grow your childcare center, ensuring total domination. Total domination. This is the Childcare Bridge, and this is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 16 of the Childcare Bridge. Today's topic is one word, and that word is profit. So I had some different content that was planned for today. However, I read a really interesting post on one of the many Facebook groups that I'm in, and I'm actually going to read some of the responses. I won't name the people, but it was beyond interesting for me to read. Now, it wasn't that I was caught off guard, but I guess I was very interested as people were replying, what people deemed, hey, you're extremely successful, and what's not successful, and it's one of those that elicited a lot of interesting responses. So I'm going to read a couple of responses, and then I'm going to kind of give you some insights, some actions, context, all that fun stuff. So the question was, how much is your monthly profit after all expenses in the U.S.? So one of the answers was approximately $18,000 a month. And then that one elicited a ton of people. Oh my gosh, how is that possible? How big are you? Are you taking a salary? Wait, providers are supposed to have a profit after each month? And that one had a lot of interesting replies. Yes, I'm in the same boat. That's what I was going to say. This person, around $3,000 a month. Small license here. My mom has a bigger license, and she's about $30,000 a month. No profit, no extra money because I have subsidized families. And that one was a very long reply that I won't read. Absolutely nothing. I raised my rates, and now I'm just having a hard time getting people to sign on. I own a small center license for 75. We have 50 enrolled. I gross $10,000 per month. And center expenses, my best year, I grossed $120,000. It can be done. It takes patience, but I'm really not making any profit. Break even, because all the bills are paid. I'm okay with that. Negative $6,000 a month. I see some commenting less than $3,000 a month. How do you make ends meet? I put all my money back into my program. I make $10,000 a month, $4,000 a month. And then there's just, like, the answers are all over the place. And I thought this was interesting because not one person on there mentioned the operating methodology that I advise to every center to use when it comes to financials. So if you haven't been following me, you know that I teach the 4 M's. And the 4 M's literally make up what is determined to be success and you having a great center, a great life, and healthy profit, and the exact opposite of that, potentially closing down, running yourself into the ground, not making any money, staff and families that don't like you. Like, they're completely polar opposites. And the 4 M's fixes that. Marketing, money, manpower, methodologies. So when I dig deeper into the money one, I teach all about deploying a methodology called Profit First. The reason that I am such a big believer in Profit First is that when I went to school to get my master's dissertation, or went to school to get my master's, I had to write a dissertation. And I chose the topic of small business failure. And my hypothesis was, if more money was invested in marketing, businesses that failed would have succeeded. And I went through and I interviewed 100 plus entrepreneurs. I did 150 hours of interviews. And the findings very much lined up with that hypothesis. Now, there's a lot more to that, and I can break that down in other episodes. But what was interesting was that almost all of them, the end result reason that they ended up closing doors typically was money. I ran out of money, didn't have enough money, couldn't get another line of credit, drained my savings, had no money, couldn't make payroll. It all came down to money. And I didn't lead people down the discussion. I would ask them these questions after they already responded to certain things. And I would say, have you heard of a methodology called Profit First? Yes or no? And it had to be a methodical survey, because otherwise I would start to kind of lead people in a direction. And you don't want to do that. You want to be very unbiased when you're asking questions that are going to be for a survey, a book, etc. And of the 100 plus people I talked to, only 2 of them have heard of Profit First, and neither of those 2 were deploying that within their business. So Profit First, in simplicity, is about you aligning your financials, aligning your books, so that you are taking profit out of the business before every single thing else is getting paid. Now, that number, initially speaking, is not necessarily irrelevant, but it doesn't have to be this gigantic number. So, round numbers. I like to use round numbers to keep the math simple. So let's say that you're doing $50,000 a month of top line revenue. So revenue that has came in the door from your enrollments. Let's say that's $1,000 a month per enrollment. I know I'm oversimplifying, and you've got 50 enrollments. They're all full-time. We'll just say that, okay? Now, the normal way of doing your bookkeeping and forecasting would be you've got your $50,000 minus expenses. So you would put all your different salaries and your rent or your payment for the building and food, and all of that stuff would get removed. And then at the end of the day, whatever's left, I would call it the scraps, is considered profit. Now, profit before taxes. The downside to doing it that way is that what you end up doing is you practice what I call bank account balance bookkeeping forecasting. You log into your bank account, great, there's $50,000 here, I must be rich. And then a 2-week payroll hits, some other stuff hits. Now your bank account's back down to 0, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm poor, I've got no money. And it goes up and down, and that is kind of how you manage the business and the financials. You're always chasing. The other big downfall to that is that if there's profit that is left over, and you haven't started to set aside some of that for taxes, you wind up in a spot where a lot of centers wind up at the end of the year, or depending on when you file and pay for your taxes, is, Michael, oh my gosh, I don't have the money to make that payment. And then they go on payment plans with the IRS. And then that happens again. And then all of a sudden your payment plans are higher. And then you're really behind the 8 ball and you're saying, well, someday I'll catch up. And that starts to stint all of your growth. And it really makes life challenging. And you dig yourself into a really big hole. So, Michael, is there a better way? And that better way is deploying Profit First. So hear me out. $50,000 comes in. I'm fine if you take a small percentage of that. I'm fine if it's 1%, 2%. If I have my way, you would be taking at least 5% of that, so $2,500, and putting it into a profit account. That money would get moved to an account that has a different checking, routing number, all that fun stuff, into a different bank or credit union, financial. I'm a big fan of credit unions, so completely up to your prerogative. So if all of your money is at one particular bank or financial, we'll use the word financial, you're going to end up setting up, and I'm oversimplifying this strategy for you, but you're going to set up a couple of additional accounts. The reason you do that is that I don't want you to see the money sitting in your account so that you then look at using that money, because that money will get eaten up. That money is going to get used. So I have said many times over the course of some of these episodes, the king and queen eat first. The king and queen eat first. There's all of these case studies and stories. And if you remember the FAA, when they're talking about and they're doing those announcements when you're on the plane of you've got to put your mask on first before you help other people. If you are drowning, how are you going to help other people? How are you going to help your staff? How are you going to make that impact? You need to make sure that you and your family are taken care of. And you need to make sure that you're doing the books and the financials the right way. And the right way is putting a small amount of money, and ideally that number grows, into a separate account for profit that once a quarter you then take and splurge. You take and you use that money on something that is fun, whether it's a trip or a gift for yourself. It has nothing to do with your center or centers. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to put a portion of that $50,000 in another account for taxes. Now, if you want to start to make it a little bit more complicated, you can look at your estimated profit for the month and take 30% of that and put it into another account. I typically, personally, don't like to take a straight percentage of sales because until you really start to kind of re-engineer the financials and you start to deploy some of the levers, which I'll talk about in this episode, to get your top line up a little bit, there's not going to be a ton of profit left over. So if at the end of the month, let's say there was $3,000 of profit that was left over, and you did $50,000, I wouldn't want you to be putting 30% of that into an account. You're not going to be able to pay all of your bills. Like you're going to, well, Michael, you told me to put 30% of the profit. So that $50,000, and then let's say initially you take 5%. So $2,500 goes into an account. So great, you've got that. You've got all your other things that are going to get paid. And then you're going to take, again, a percentage of that profit number and then whatever final additional profit is left. You're not taking out 100% of the profit every month because, again, that also is you taking it out after. I want you bringing in the sales, and then I want you to move money before you're paying everything else. Because then you start to get a little bit more scrappy. You start to look at, well, yeah, I don't have 50,000 to work with. I've got 47.5. That's the number I've got to work with. So what can we do here? And you're not going to want to not be getting that profit number because you're going to start to see the fun things that I can do for you and your family. And again, the king and queen eat first. You have to take your profit first. You have to put some money aside for taxes. That's how you build what I call a no-joke business. You have to have this strong foundation. Now, the flip side, if you're just getting started, you might say, well, Michael, should I take zero profit? Still want you, even if it's 1%, you're taking a little bit of money and it's going into an account. And then you're saying, well, next month I'm going to aim to take 2% and then 3%. And then maybe wait a few more months and then I'll get to 4 and 5. And I want you to start to do that because otherwise every dollar is going to get eaten up very, very rapidly. I want you to put a little bit of that money aside so that you have that account that you can splurge on, use it, and enjoy life with. Because otherwise, it makes like the day-to-day in this business really, really challenging. It's already challenging as it is. And if you're like, I'm literally feel like I'm doing this for nothing, it's just not a good spot to be in. Now, the other thing that you have to keep in mind is that all of these numbers, you need to be paying yourself a salary as well. If you're not taking a salary, that needs to be a part. And that is not a profit piece. That is part of the operational expenses. I don't want you not taking a salary and you're saying, well, I'm just going to take, if there's a couple $100 profit, I'll just take that out at the end. You're taking a salary in there. You're moving your profit before everything else is getting paid. You're taking that profit first. You're setting a little bit of money aside for taxes into a separate account that collects interest so you can pay your taxes. And then from there, you really know what you're working with. And you want to be looking at these numbers each month and seeing what needs to get tweaked. And that's how I start to do my forecasting. Now, the chances are pretty high based on those comments that I had read, where most people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're making $18,000 a month profit, that a lot of centers I know are not overly profitable. So I'm not going to repeat and redo my entire episode verbatim on the levers that you can pull to grow that revenue. The easiest lever to pull is always pulling the lever of raising your tuition. There are some people that were writing in there, oh my God, you must be serving people that are making six figures plus. My infant rate is $130 a week. If you haven't reverse engineered the math and really looked at everything of you taking a salary, taking profit, money for taxes, paying your staff, if you can't make a business work on those numbers, you shouldn't be getting into that particular business or going in that particular area. Or you really have to think outside the box and really do some demographic research. Because at those numbers, you're not going to be able to make any money. And then what is the point of all of this? Yes, I get it. You're there. You want to serve families. I'm with you. But if your family isn't being served first, if you're having to be working the 60, 70, 80 hours a week, what's it all for? So the fastest lever is to look at raising your tuition. So re-listen to that episode. I'll make sure I link it in the show notes for you as well. Now, what I also want you to do, in addition to re-listening to that episode, is look at what are some of the other quick levers that you can pull. There's always meat on the bone, as I like to say. There's always some low-hanging fruit. There's always some leads that didn't convert that could drive you some quick enrollments. There's always other strategies and tactics that you can deploy to add some additional revenue. If you were to add after school care, for example, so maybe staying open an additional hour or two, or starting a little bit earlier, as a simple example. Partnering with different organizations like Soccer Shots, there are ways to get some revenue from that, and deploying and adding additional programs that are similar to something like a Soccer Shots. So there's plenty of levers, and I get it. It's easy for me to sit over here and say, raise your tuition and start doing all these other programs, but I need you to have that sense of urgency. This industry is going to continue to get more and more and more challenging. Things are going to continue to get more expensive. Your staff is going to continue to demand more. So if you know that to deliver XYZ type of experience at your center, you need to be charging this amount of money, then you have to start to look at what is the path to make that happen. How can I start to move in that direction? What's step 1, step 2, step 3? And then you start to be able to move in the right direction, rather than just continuing to be in that hole. And I understand, like, I have never seen in my 10 plus years of being in this industry a more challenging time than we are hitting right now. But on the flip side, I have never seen more opportunity right now, today, in front of me than I have ever seen in the last 10 years. And the opportunity is around growing your brand, really building yourself into the community, looking at acquiring and taking over other centers. We've had dozens and dozens of centers that we've worked with that have literally acquired other locations for next to nothing because the owner that had that location just didn't want to do it anymore. And they're literally getting handed a business that has $500,000 a year of revenue. Now, yes, you're going to have to turn some things around and move it in the right direction, but that stuff is happening day in and day out. There are a lot of centers that are closing, so there are opportunities there, but I need you to go back to that original word that I started this episode with, of profit. You have to be able to start to take a little bit of profit out of the business before everything else goes through. That'll get you in the right mindset. This is a lot more of a mindset game than anything else. And as you start to see those things start to come to fruition, and you start to see the profit, as I said, you're going to want to take a little bit more and find other strategies. And it's not cutting everything. You rarely are ever going to be able to cut expenses to massively grow your revenue. Now, are there some expenses you might need to cut? Definitely. There usually are some little subscriptions and some different things like that. But I have rarely ever seen a successful business that has cut their way to the top. They have cut some expenses, or they've made sure that they were operating more efficiently, but then they've really focused on the profit line, they focused on more operating efficiencies, and then they've started to grow. Those are the centers that are more and more and more profitable. Those are the centers, as I was reading earlier in the episode, of the people that are making $10, $15, $20, $25, $30,000 a month of profit. And that is not unreasonable whatsoever. But it all starts with you taking your profit first, getting into those habits, and then starting to go through the motions, putting that plan in place of, what is that step one? Okay, great, I'm going to move this lever. I'm going to start with this. And it's the daily singles, hitting those daily singles to move you in the right direction. I hope that this episode helped you, gave you some things to think about, but also some actions that you can start to take to move your way to a more profitable center. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. I appreciate you more than you know. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. It's Michael Tasner signing off. See ya.